Roger Dean Craig, former Dallas County Deputy Sheriff, winner of the Man of the Year Award in 1960 for law enforcement in recognition of outstanding performance in the line of duty. Where were you on the day of the assassination of John Kennedy?
I was standing out in front of the sheriff's office, which at that time was at 505 Main Street. They've moved it since then, but it was at 505 Main Street, directly in front of the front door.
Was the motorcade passing that area at that time?
No, we had to wait about 15 minutes before the motorcade arrived, but the sheriff had sent us out there that early to wait.
Were you merely a spectator, or were you on duty?
Well, no, I was on duty, but a couple hours before Kennedy was to arrive, the sheriff called us in, what I call the street people, the plainclothesmen, the detectives, and he instructed us that we were to stand out in front and in no way take part in the security of that motorcade, that we were merely spectators and nothing more.
Did that seem unusual to you?
It did to me at the time, because there were so many people around and so few Dallas police officers. This is one of the first things I noticed, was the lack of Dallas police officers. Tried to keep the people back. The president came by and they made the right turn on to Houston Street. And, I'll say, a few seconds later, give them time to get to Elm Street and make the left, I heard what I call a report, a gunshot. And I said, oh my God. And I turned and started toward Houston Street, running just as hard as I could. And I was probably 15 steps from Houston Street. And before I reached those 15 steps, I heard two more reports.
Then you arrived at Elm Street?
Right.
Okay, what did you see?
Well, there was a Dallas police officer running up the grassy knoll to the picket fence. So I immediately assumed the motorcade had left by then. And I immediately assumed that he knew something about the shots, or he wouldn't have been headed for the picket fence. So I followed him.
Were you aware the president had been hit?
Not at that time. Now, people were mentioning the president was shot, and someone else said a Secret Service agent was shot, and there were just stories flying all over. But my interest was to get behind that picket fence, because that's where that Dallas police officer was headed. I worked in that area for, probably 7, 8 minutes, maybe, something like that, until I ran on to Mr. and Mrs. Arnold Rowland. Now, Mr. Rowland told me that 15 minutes before the motorcade arrived, he saw two men on the 6th floor of the schoolbook depository. Now, one was a white male in the east corner of the 6th floor with a rifle. The other one was a colored male at the west end of the 6th floor, pacing back and forth. And I went to the south side of Elm Street to look for any signs of any bullets striking the curb or the street or anything. By this time it had been established that the president had been shot. And Deputy Sheriff Buddy Walters joined me at that time. Everybody was coming to the scene of the shooting, which is normal. People are just that way. But as I was searching the south curb of Elm Street, I heard a shrill whistle. And I looked up. It just drew my attention. It was coming from across the street. And there was a light green Rambler station wagon driving real slow west on Elm Street. And the driver was leaning over to his right, looking up at a man running down the grass. So I immediately tried to cross the street to take these two people into custody for questioning. Just everybody else was coming to the scene. These were the only two people leaving. I mean, this was suspicious in my mind, at the time. So I wanted to talk to them. But I couldn't get across the street because the city officer who was stationed at Houston and Elm had left his post, and the traffic, was so heavy I just couldn't get across the street to him. But I did get a good look at the man coming down the grassy knoll. And he got in the station wagon, and they drove west on Elm Street. It had been determined that the shots came from the southeast window. How, I don't know. The Dallas police were saying this, so we immediately went there. And Deputy Sheriff Luke Mooney was with me when we found the shells. We found 3 hulls beside the window on the 6th floor. And they were laying 3 in a row, not more than an inch.
This was breast, the 3 spent cartridges.
3 spent cartridges. They were lying 3 in a row, not more than an inch apart, all pointing in the same direction. Of course, I didn't touch them. They hadn't been photographed or fingerprinted or anything. I didn't touch those. And there was a lunch sack, very small, brown paper lunch sack up there. Had some chicken bones in it. And there was a soda bottle sitting on a box. And we began then to search for a weapon. And we started toward, everybody took a different direction, and Deputy Sheriff Boone and myself just happened to head for the northwest corner of the building. And Boone was ahead of me by about 8 feet. And there were a stack of boxes just at the head of the stairwell going downstairs. And Boone looked over into it and said, "Here it is. Here's the rifle." So I immediately went over beside him and looked over, and there was a rifle. But we didn't touch it until Captain Fritz and Lieutenant Day from the ID department of the Dallas Police Department got there. Now, Captain Fritz was the chief of homicide. Lieutenant Day was from the Identification Bureau. They got there and took some pictures of the rifle. And then I believe Dave pulled the rifle out and handed it to Captain Fritz, who held it up by had a strap on it. He held it up by the strap and asked if anyone knew what kind of rifle it was. Well, by this time, Deputy Constable Seymour Weitzman had joined us. And Weitzman was a gun buff. He had a sporting goods store at one time. He was very good with weapons. And he said it looks like a Mauser. And he walked over to Fritz. And Captain Fritz was holding the rifle up in the air. And I was standing next to Weitzman, who was standing next to Fritz. And we weren't any more than 6 or 8 inches from the rifle. And stamped right on the barrel of the rifle was 7.65 Mauser. And that's when Weitzman said it is a Mauser and pointed to the 7.65 Mauser stamp on the barrel.
There's an intonation to that statement that it should mean something.
Well, the shells we found came from a 6.5 Italian rifle.
You mean those 3
The
cartridges?
two don't relate.
3 cartridges that were
Found at the southeast corner.
In the southeast corner.
Came from a 6.5 Italian carbine. That afternoon, after Officer Tippett was killed, they took a suspect into custody. And I was thinking about this man getting away from me.
This was the man that got into the Green Rambler.
The Green Rambler. And I called Captain Fritz at his office and gave him a description of the man I saw get into the Rambler. And he told me, and I quote him, "It sounds like the suspect we have in custody come on up and take a look at him. So I went out and got in my unmarked car and drove to the City Hall, went directly to Captain Fritz's office. And we went into Captain Fritz's inner office, and the man was sitting in a chair behind a desk. And there was another gentleman. I assumed he was one of Fritz's people because he had the white cowboy hat on, which was the trademark at that time of the Dallas Homicide Bureau. And Fritz turned to me and said, "Is this the man you saw?" And I said, "Yes." And it was. It was. So he turned to the suspect and he said, "This man saw you leave." At which time the suspect became a little excited. And he said, "I told you people I did." And Fritz said, "Now take it easy, son," talking to the suspect. He said, "We're just trying to find out what happened here." He said, "What about the car?" I didn't say station wagon. He said, "What about the car?" At which time the suspect leaned forward and put both hands up on the desk and said, "That station wagon belongs to Mrs. Payne. Don't try to drag her into this."
And thank you for your time.
Can you imagine the courage that it would take to stand up against such intimidation? I can't even begin to imagine. There's only one person I know who has endured anything close to that, and that's Judith Berry Baker. One of my favorite quotes is, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the judgment that what you want is more important than your fear." And I'd like to kind of rewrite that right now. Courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the judgment that what you stand for is more important than your fear. With that, it is my distinct pleasure to bring up our panel right now. We've got Stephen Cameron, the producer of the film, Christian Falkenstein, the associate producer, and Roger Craig's son, Roger Craig Jr. Gentlemen, if you would, come on up and give them a big round of applause, please.
Again, can I see a raise of hands who, before this presentation, who has heard of Roger Craig? Okay. Most of the world outside of this room hasn't. And so when I first came across the story of Roger Dean Craig in 2012. Before I say any more, first I want to say our writer and our producer, Steven Zephyr, that you saw at the end of the presentation, he couldn't be here today. He's had to go into hiding because the truth that's in this screenplay that we put together for the deputy. And he mentioned a guy named Frank. They're all both in an undisclosed location, but they're safe. Just kidding. I'm really just kidding. Steven, he's on a production in Los Angeles. He couldn't be here today. And Frank Lyons, he is in North Carolina attending to a family matter. Let me introduce our associate producer. This is Christian Falkenstein. And he's not only our associate producer, but he's also a great friend of mine. And I'm going to embarrass him a little bit right now.
I'm used to it. It's okay.
He's a very humble guy. But just earlier last month, Chris was awarded the 2018 Carnegie Hero Award for acts of bravery and heroism for saving a person that was drowning off the Jersey Shore. Chris risked his life to help this man, a man that he didn't even know. I'm going to let Chris tell you guys a little bit about that. You tell everybody a little bit about what happened that day, Chris?
Yeah, sure, of course. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you to Judith and Steve for bringing me onto this project. This is just taking on a life of its own, and it's so cool to have like-minded people like you all here sharing information, working together towards a common good. And I think that that's what this, to me, represents, is people coming together to make the world a better place. So last September was towards the end of September, Hurricane Maria was in town, and the lifeguards were off duty. The beach was packed. It was a beautiful weekend. I came out to play some beach volleyball, and it was about 6:30 in the evening. And there was a swimmer that was caught in the rip current about 100 yards out, and he was massively distressed. He was, giving all the textbook signals that he needed help. And I did a quick surveillance of the beach, and it did not look like anybody was really, making their way to do anything to help this guy. And in the past, when I was younger, I did some basic lifeguard training, and I just said, listen, talked to my volleyball partner and said, I got to go save that guy's life because, no one's here. So I ran in, and we battled the elements for quite some time. I was just trying to keep his head above float for as long as I could. I knew the rescue on my own would be, a difficult one, but I had hoped that in time that we would get some additional support to weather out the storm. And going through moments like that, it was a close call. I did take in some water. I was rushed to the hospital and treated for near drowning. But we all worked together. It was a great story in the end. The victim and I came out okay, and the authority and the Coast Guard, and it was just an amazing ending to something that could have been tragic. So that's how Steve brought me into the project, was recognizing our theme is on heroes. Yeah.
Chris, who gave you the award during that ceremony? Was it your congressman?
So, yeah, Congressman Fitzpatrick, Governor Wolf reached out to me, and Senator Casey as well, but Congressman Fitzpatrick recognized me.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for sharing that with everybody, Chris. Sorry to throw you under the bus there and embarrass you.
We got a movie to make, and this is a story about Roger Dean Craig, and it's a story that Junior over here, we just got a little bit to know him this morning, and honestly, this is just an amazing opportunity. It's an amazing family of heroes. His father, Roger, served in the Korean War. He was a deputy sheriff of the year, had an award just before the assassination. And Junior also served, and his son Clay, God bless him, also served in Iraq. So we'd like to bring the attention to Roger Craig Jr. and introduce himself.
And before we get started with that, I would also like to thank Judith Baker for putting this conference together. Anybody that knows Judith knows how hard that she works, and I just want to give Judith a round of applause for bringing us all here today. Thank you, Judith, and thank you, Don, for the introduction. Okay. I'm going to go back to the story when I first came across Roger Dean Craig Sr.'s life. It was in 2012. I was going through a little bit of a hard time at that time. My father committed suicide, or so they say. I was doing research online, and I was searching things. I was just trying to find answers about why my dad might have done it, or why are things so suspicious with this. Things just, in my mind, didn't add up. And I was on the internet, and I've always been interested in the assassination of John F. Kennedy. I think my eyes were first open to it when I saw The Men Who Killed Kennedy, the documentary, the great History Channel documentary. And I had also seen Executive Action when I was a kid,
when I saw that movie, I was watching, I couldn't make sense of it. It seemed like a documentary, like I was watching something that was real. And that kind of put me on the path. And then it was Oliver Stone's JFK that sealed the deal for me. And I had never heard of Roger Dean Craig. I had never heard of his story. And while I was doing these searches about my father's own suicide, I was getting things coming up in the search results about JFK and Roger Dean Craig. And I clicked on it, and it just opened my eyes to a whole another subject matter of the assassination that I was never aware of. And so about a year or two later, I was looking for a project to produce. And maybe in my own way, it was a way to come to terms with my father's own suicide. But I started reaching out and trying to find somebody that I could talk to that knew Roger Craig. And I learned that he had a son, but I couldn't get in contact with him. I had no contact information whatsoever, and I somehow, some way, I was going to give up. It was the last attempt I was going to try to contact this person, and I found a name and a phone number, and this person was the mother of Roger Jr.'s daughter, and she gave me her contact information and put me in touch with her. Her name is Nita Edwards. Can you please stand up, Nita, for 1 second? This is Nita Edwards. This is Roger Dean Craig's daughter, and her husband, Scott. And so she gave me her dad's number, and I called him, and it went something like this. Phone rings. Person on the other end answers. I said, "Hi, how you doing? My name is Steve Cameron. I'm working on a film about your father." And less than a couple of seconds, "Not interested," click, and he hung up on me. And I sat there for a couple of minutes, and I said, I've come this far. I'm going to call him back one more time, and I'll see if he'll talk to me. So I called him one more time, and before he could hang up on me again, I said, "Sir, please, just let me say a couple of things. I just want to talk about your dad and what we're doing. I want to make a movie about your father. This is a very personal story to me, and I know it is to you. And would you be interested in telling me more about your father?" And at that time, Roger, there was a pause, and he said, "Well, you know what? I've actually been thinking a lot about my dad lately." And so at that point, Roger started opening up to me, and we had a great conversation. And that was the first conversation. That's what led us here today. Without any further ado, everybody, I would like to introduce Roger Dean Craig, Jr.
Yeah, I guess.
You want to say hi to everybody, Roger?
I'm glad to see all y'all smiling faces here. Thank you very much.
I just want to share a text message that Roger's daughter sent me.
Yeah, I know who man.
This was about a year ago, and it was after we were developing our screenplay at that time. She said, "I can't wait to be sitting in a theater learning who my grandfather was."
My daughter.
And here we are today. She also sent me this text. "I am so excited to get to know my grandfather. Thank you so much for giving me a piece of my family's missing memories back. It's a void I've had all my life." Roger,
Yes, sir.
tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what it was like growing up to be Roger Dean Craig Jr.
Well, far back as I can remember, which is age 3 or 4, my father was working at a Pyrex company, and he wanted to go to work for the sheriff's department. He wanted to be a police officer. But every time he'd go down and take the physical, he didn't weigh enough. So the third time he went to take physical, a friend of his that was the deputy sheriff, he's now deceased from old age, but he told my father to eat 10 pounds of bananas just before going getting on the scales. So my father went to the store, bought 10 pounds of bananas. Then he went and took the physical. Now, whether or not he lost the bananas after the physical, I don't know. But anyway, his partner that was training him was the guy that told him to go eat the bananas. And once he got trained, he'd drive around. Sometime he'd take me drive around. We worked southeast, or he worked southeast rather. I did too when I got in the sheriff's department. And he'd drive through Seagoville. Well, he got in a riot down there one time when I wasn't with him, you know, because I liked to ride. And he come out pretty good on it, because his little friend under the front seat helped him out. It was a Russian burp gun with a 75-round magazine on it. He didn't shoot nobody. After they got through beating on him and he got to the gun, he just stood up, racked the boat back, pointed it at them, and said, "Disperse." And then people left like a covey of quail.
That's how they described it to you.
Yep.
They dispersed. They left like a covey of quail.
That's right.
They flew out of there.
He said they flew out of there so fast you couldn't believe it. But you looking at a 9mm machine gun, it'll make you leave.
And that was when your father was a rookie?
Yeah, he had just got released from his training officer, and he was a rookie, and he'd drive down the dirt roads looking in the bar ditches and everything, which I did the same thing for some reason. And I had a partner one time I was training, and he told me, "I want to ride with him. All he does is ride around looking in bar ditches." Well, the very next day I found the body in one of the bar ditches. So, but he was riding with somebody else, and he said, "I leave and you find a body." I said, "I told you. The bar ditches out in the country, that's where you find most of your stuff."
I read that Sheriff Bill Decker, when he hired your father was the youngest Dallas Sheriff deputy to ever be hired by Decker. Is that?
That's correct. He was 22 or 23 when he joined the sheriff's department, I believe.
And didn't he win? He won the Sheriff Deputy of the Year.
Yeah, in 1960, when we were living on Leroy Street at that time, and he won Deputy of the Year for capturing an international jewel thief. And they had a big banquet. My mother got a watch with engraving on the back. My father got a watch with an engraving on the back and a certificate, but I don't know where them watches are now.
You were there at that ceremony? You remember that?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
I was a little before it, about that high.
How did that make you feel at that time?
Well, I had my Decker fedora on my head.
Oh yeah. You told me a story about your dad had taken you. He took you to work one day, and that's when you met Sheriff Decker. Can you tell everyone a little bit about that story?
This was before my father went out into patrol, and he was working dispatch with a guy named Sinclair, and I walked in with my little vest on and my dress shirt and my fedora. I was 4 or 5 years old. Anyway, Decker come out, grabbed me by the hand and said, I'm going to take him in here. Bill Decker and his wife didn't have any children. So he took me in there and he set me down in a chair and he said, type me out a letter. Put a piece of paper in there and I went to banging on a typewriter. You know, I didn't know what I was doing, but it was making things on the paper, so I just kept typing. Then he grabbed me by the hand and he says, come on, we're going to go somewhere. He went around the dispatch, which was right around the corner, and he says, me and my little deputy here, we're going to go take care of business. So we went out and got in his red Rambler. And there used to be a place called Cowboy Town. It was like an old town, you know, and you're supposed to leave your car in the parking lot and ride the stagecoach in to go into town, you know, and they'd have mock shootouts and all that with the sheriff. Decker didn't stop in the parking lot. He went to the stables inside the town, pulled that little red Rambler in there, closed the doors, and we stayed all day there.
So he treated you as kind of like his own son?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He loved kids.
What did your dad think about Sheriff Decker? What was his thoughts?
Oh, he thought he was the greatest thing that ever walked on the face of the earth. When he first went to work there, he liked Decker, liked the way he acted, liked the way he treated people. But later on, it kind of went sour.
I want to, just for time reasons, we're going to jump forward a little bit to November 22nd, 1963. Do you remember seeing your dad on that day?
After everything went down, I was at my grandmother's house, and we were watching it on the TV. And then when that went down, my father came over, picked me up, took me. I was staying with him at the time instead of my mother in Corpus. And he was pretty shook up. He said, it ain't right. That's what he said, it ain't right. And later on I found out what he meant was, it's not being right of killing the president, it was the way the investigation was going. It wasn't right. Because I'm going to ask a question, everybody in here. I've investigated quite a few things when I was at the Sheriff's Department. Within 10 minutes after the assassination, they knew who the guy was, where he lived, and what gun he was using. And they hadn't even found the gun yet. I just, you know, that's what, it ain't right. You know?
The video presentation covered a lot of what his dad witnessed and what he went through in the years following the assassination. I want to ask you, Roger, what do you think happened to your father? Do you think do you think your father committed suicide?
In my heart, I say no. And when I came to claim the body at the morgue, there were bruises on his wrist and bruises on his knees. Direction of the bullet come from the upper right hand, pressed against his upper right part of his chest, going down from right to left and into the back. Now, you would have to hold that rifle like this, and you cannot reach the trigger.
A friend of mine said you'd have to be a Houdini to kill yourself with a rifle like that at that angle.
Yeah, and he didn't have a .22 rifle anyway. And
didn't you tell me his rifles had been stolen not too long before that?
Oh yeah, about 2 or 3 weeks before, he's living in a house that Penn Jones provided. He went somewhere, we all did, and when he came back, the house had been broke into and all the rifles were gone. The only reason my father still had his .45 and .357 Magnum, because .357 Magnum went in the glove compartment and the .45 went right here. So he still had his pistols.
And maybe in a minute or two, can you saw a copy of the original autopsy report, correct?
Yes.
And there were bruises or lacerations on his knees and his wrists.
And his wrist, and also the angle of the bullet. They tell exactly how it come from upper right down to lower left, lodging in the back. All right, I'm gonna give you a scenario that I come up with through my investigations. If I tie your hands behind your back, put you on your knees, stand to the right of you with a .22 rifle, stick it into your chest, and pull the trigger, which way the bullet's gonna go? Right to left and into the back. And the powder burns were all internal. There was none on the outside of the skin, so that means the barrel was pressed right up against the skin. That's the way I look at it.
How would you describe your father? And you told me that you said he would never have killed himself.
My father loved life, no matter what. He loved it. When adversities come his way, he adapts and overcomes. You go forward, you never go backwards. And my father, thing he taught me is you tell the truth, no matter what.
And I know we're closing up here, and I know this is such a sensitive topic, and we could talk about this and would love to much longer. I asked Junior about this script. It's the manuscript written by Sheriff Deputy Roger Craig. Junior has read this. He says this is a very accurate accounting of how the series of events unfolded. We will have these in the back at a table for you to take a look at. They are available for purchase, and then we had spun off for anybody that might be interested. We are creating the deputy film, so if anyone's interested in getting on board with this project, we'd love to talk with you further about that as well.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We're going to be at the speakers' dinner tonight, and we're going to be talking a lot more that we haven't covered here. So please join us there. Also, I want to give a shout out to Gary Fannin. Is he here? He's not here. Gary, I met Gary last night, and he will. I believe he has a documentary called "The Innocence of Oswald." And I'm looking forward to seeing that. I believe that he's going to play a portion of that at the speakers' dinner. Also, I want to also give a shout out to S.T. Patrick of Midnight Writer News. He's right back here. Everybody give him a round of applause, please. He has a great podcast. It's midnightwriternews.com. And I listened to his last broadcast on the flight over here, and it was excellent. He's going to be speaking, I believe, tomorrow at around 3 p.m. So don't miss that. Thank you very much, everybody.
Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Christian Finkelstein, Stephen Cameron, and Roger